make a mess?
No, someone else did. I'm just a victim of this mess. I don't know what's sticky. Like, what did you bring to school that's sticky? Someone put duct tape on the floor and just ripped it off.
I mean, if you're worried about your shoes or something, you can slide over a desk.
Nah, it's okay. It's not really like too much to make it. I'll stay closer to this thing. You guys are looking at it and I was like, I don't even like, I don't know. Steak was good. It was fun. I'm podium. And my individual events, and by the way, and I realized. We didn't, like, our team-wise didn't score on us, but, you know, individually I did pretty good, but I'm happy with that. So, what's the other thank you, I literally like, stuck them on this morning because I was bored. How are you? I feel like they look
I have a quick question.
Okay.
On the ACTM,
Yep.
where do students like go to find where they test? Like,
I emailed all of them already. I've sent them the directions.
well, no, I mean like just the one from the deal. Like Austin Shipman came and asked me.
I sent it out this morning. I just got it yesterday night.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so
It's all in their email. I sent it to every kid that was signed up.
sweet. I will have them check.
There's a map, and yeah, it should all be laid out.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Just on my do you have an extra Unit 6 review paper? Because I went here on Friday, so
Yeah, it'll be in the
Okay.
crate number 95. Taylor is here. Sarah. Lauren. All right, the bells are turned off here, so it was time to get started here a minute ago. So first off, I need to give you all an announcement. We're getting kicked out of this room for one day next week. It is Tuesday, so on Tuesday we will meet in room 1105, which is down in Phase 2, first floor, Mr. Williams' room, if you know where that is. And this morning I did post that in Google Classroom, so if you forget where that is, then you can pull up Google Classroom and look it up in the moment. Since that's in Phase 2, I'm assuming we're supposed to have first lunch, so we'll need to have first lunch. So if you show up, as always, you're welcome to hang out in there during lunch, but you're also welcome to not show up until the second part of class. Secondly, so we were planning on having our Chapter 6 exam next class, but we're going to delay that one day. So this will still be basically the test review today, and we'll move on to something different on Tuesday. So you're not getting necessarily more class time to prepare for Chapter 6, but you have more calendar time, I guess. So remember, Chapter 6 is basically slope fields, exponential growth and decay, and then the tough one, which is separation of variables. But we've been practicing that a bit. Next class we'll practice like one or two more separation of variables, but short of that we need to finish up what we need from that. So in class today, the handout you picked up is 96, so I'm finally going to tell you how to deal with that absolute value sign that shows up in separation of variables that we've been ignoring. I've got two Khan Academy assignments for you. One is on separation of variables, just general solutions, and one is on particular solutions. So if you've got those skills down, then that will be, of course, a little bit quicker. And if you're still making mistakes or struggling with that, then you got to stick with it and keep with it a little bit longer. But that's a big portion of our next test. So once I get you started on that, I'll also take questions from the review that I assigned to you guys over the weekend. That way, if someone's asking a question that you don't need help with, you can be working on a couple of your Khan Academy questions. And then finally, even though your test is not next time, if you just procrastinate and just wait that much longer to study, then it doesn't do you any good. It's not going to help you that it's delayed. But the things that I suggest that you would review, and the order that I would review them is A, there's two A's, but A, separation of variables, by far the most important thing as far as points are going to be concerned. It's the hardest, takes the most practice. I've got extra practice on my website that was not required, but you need to make sure that you're solid with that skill. Review 93, thank you, which was exponential growth and decay questions, because I don't think there was any of those on the review, but you should expect one or two on the test or quiz. To me, this is more of a quiz because it's less stuff, and I don't think it's quite 50 points. I don't think it'll be weighted as heavily as the others, but I'm not sure about that. Then the Chapter 6 review, then finally the slope fields worksheet would not be bad to look back at. That's just the order of things that I would prioritize as far as reviewing. Okay, so any questions on logistic stuff before we jump into this 96? Okay. So in 96, I've got two separation of variable questions that I've already started for you, and we're going to look at how to actually deal with this absolute value sign and make sure that we don't miss this, because I've been telling you to just kind of assume it's positive, but honestly sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't work. So the key to these is you have to remember that absolute value like this has really two solutions. To make this be true, x could be positive 2, but x could also be negative 2, because the absolute value of that becomes positive 2. Okay, that part you know, right? Okay, so let's go down to question 1. Assuming we did separation of variables, we separate, we integrate, we remember to put plus c, and we get down to this point. Let's see how we should work this and then how to deal with that absolute value sign. All right, so first off, we've got, as soon as you see c, you probably want to go ahead and solve for it. So if we plug in 1 for y, this would be -1, but the absolute value of -1 is +1. The natural log of 1 is 0 though. You don't have to keep this one absolute value of 2 because 2 is already positive, so you don't have to keep up with this absolute value sign. Then as soon as you solve for c, you should be plugging that back into where you started solving for it. Okay, and then the last part of all these questions is trying to solve for y. So we can multiply everything by a -2. That cleans up the left side a little bit. And then on the harder questions, and this does show up on the AP exam, so it'll probably show up in at least one question on our quiz. If your y that you're trying to solve for is stuck inside of a logarithm, you need to consider the exponentiating step, making both sides the exponent on e. Okay, now here's what it becomes new. So again, we've done these a lot. Obviously, I know some of you still need to practice that a bit because it does take a lot of practice, but right here, e to the log base e of this stuff just becomes this stuff. Before today though, I was telling you to ignore the absolute value signs. And that's not necessarily what you want to do. We're gonna not write them for a second, but I'm gonna show you how it can make a difference in your answer. So I'm gonna highlight right here because I need to come back to this. Now over here we can also clean this up a little bit too. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but you could bring this up, and then e to the log base e of x to the -2 would just be x to the -2, and then times e to the, if you bring this 2 up, e to the log base e of 4 is just going to be 4. Now here's the part I need y'all to focus on. This absolute value sign, remember, if it's absolute value, just like this x could be 2 or it could be the opposite of 2. So over here, 5 minus 6y could equal this stuff or it might equal the opposite of that stuff. The only way for you to know whether it's positive or negative is you have to use this initial condition again. You need to go and plug it in and see if it's supposed to equal positive this stuff or negative this stuff. So if I plug in 1 for y, this side becomes -1. If I plug in 2 for x, that side becomes +1. So do you see how they're not the same? So for this question, 5 minus 6y didn't equal this, it equaled the opposite of this. So we have to multiply it by negative. It's like saying this case this time. Sometimes it's this case, this time it was this case. The only way I know to multiply that other side by negative is from this initial condition. The initial condition does not make this true if you just remove the absolute value sign. So now as soon as I put on the negative, I'm going to just move this to the denominator. Now we can just finish solving it normally. Now I kind of threw this out as an idea for you guys last week, and I said it was going to be more important this week. But it's a good idea, even though you probably should use the initial condition here to see if this is positive or negative. It's really a good idea to still make sure that this initial condition is true for your final answer. Because if your final answer does not go through the 0.21, there's 0 chance that that is correct. Now, it might be that I should have made it negative and I didn't. It might be that I undid minus with the minus, or it could be some other mistake. But if I quickly plug in 2 for x, this becomes 2/12, and 2/12 is the same thing as 1/6. 1/6 plus 5/6 is 1. So if you're willing to do that, it will help you catch whether you should have made that negative or not. And you actually do have to put some thought into it. Sometimes if you make it negative, you're going to be making your answer wrong. And sometimes if you don't make it negative, you're going to be having a wrong answer. So again, as soon as I exponentiated, I didn't write the absolute value signs down here, but I plugged that initial condition in to see if this stuff equaled the positive version of the other side or the negative version of the other side. It's not going to be both, but it could be either one of those. Okay, so let's look at one more, and then I'm going to strongly suggest that you maybe describe this to yourself in words. So, all right, so I've already started the question. I separated, I integrated, just trying to help you focus here. We see plus c, so we start to solve for that. Looks like c would be 0. So plug in 0 for c. Okay, and then if you start solving for y, multiply everything or both sides by a negative. Okay, what's the next step to solve for y? Okay, exponentiate both sides, make both sides be exponents on e. So what is e to the log base e of this stuff? Okay. Now notice, here's what's different about this that I didn't tell you last week. Absolute value sign is just disappearing. We're pretending like it's not here now. Of course, in mathematics, we have to keep up with everything. So I'm going to assume that I don't need it for just a second. Okay, and again, this could equal the positive version of this, or this could equal the negative version of this. Sometimes this is positive, sometimes it's negative, and the only way for you to know is to use this initial condition again. If I plug in 2 for y, I get -1 on the left side. If I plug in 0 for x, what do I get on the right side?
1.
So you see how these are not currently the same thing? They're not really equal. Then this one actually equaled the negative version of this. So you had to know to squeeze that in. Now this side at the initial condition would equal -1. This side in the initial condition equals -1. And so since that's true, now I have correctly dealt with this absolute value sign. Again, it all is the exact same thing as this. I know this one seems overly basic, but to get rid of that absolute value sign, it could equal the positive version of the other side or the negative version, one or the other. That initial condition tells us whether it should be positive. Okay, and then you could subtract 1 over and divide both sides by -1. And then I guess it's kind of optional to do it a second time. But again, if this point, if your answer does not go through that point, then there's no way that it is the final correct answer. So to me, I would still check down here at the very end. You plug in 0 for x, you get 2 for y. Since that is true, then that makes me feel much better about what I'm doing here. But what we did last week that's not really true is you can't really ignore these absolute value signs. You have to put some thought into if it equals the positive version or the negative version. Most of the time it's the positive version, but it can also be the negative version. You guys okay with that? Yep. All right, so again, that's kind of wordy, but if I was you, I would probably give yourself a quick little sentence at the top of this. What do you need to check for, or put a star by the steps that you think you might want to look back at, because again, it's really just like one step on each of those questions that I'm asking you to consider something different. Okay, I also have some papers I need to collect. I'm not going to change the agenda and do that today, but I will ask for those next class. So make sure there's like a book assignment I need to give you some points for. This review I need to give you some points for. Just make sure that you guys bring your binders with you next class. Okay, so now we need to kind of split in two different ways. So on a blank sheet of paper, if you do your scratch work, again, I got 2 Khan Academy quizzes. One is separation of variables general solution. That should be the easier one where you don't have to really deal with C other than remember to put plus C in your answer. And one that's particular solution where you actually have to solve for C and plug that number in. So that's really the only new assignment I'm giving to you guys. And I would like those to be 100%ed, please. So work them carefully. And of course, learn from your mistakes. Yep.
Will there be a Google Classroom thing for the stuff you're collecting next class?
Probably.
Because I won't be here.
No. If you're not going to be here, if I don't have time to get to it, my B days are just kind of busy at the end of the day. If I don't happen to get to it, you can give it to me the next class. I won't count it late if it's my fault. So. Okay, so I am going to take questions from this one-page review, and when you are out of questions or someone's asking a question that you were good with, go ahead and work on your Khan Academy quizzes so that you're making the best use of your class. But if someone's asking a question that you want help with or that you got stuck on, then you should probably follow along. You can do the Khan Academy outside of class technically. And there's only 2 of them. So if you do them carefully and you really know what you're doing, then high chance you don't have homework for any of that other than just reviewing. And good news is we are down to, we still need to quiz this, but there is like, I think there's only 4 new lessons, 4 new topics that you have to learn in AB before we can transition into just reviewing for the AP exam. So, and one of them is really just like one step more than something you've already done. So
How many more tests?
this one, and then we'll have one more over the last unit. And then as we get close to the AP exam, we won't have any more big tests, but I'll do quite a few mini quizzes, partially to like help y'all kind of chip away at what you should be studying on, and partially to give you some great opportunities. So, you know, those aren't worth much, but if you do a bunch of them, then they add up over time. So, and then that'll be pretty much it for assessment grades. Okay, so on the review, just to kind of do this in some orderly fashion, the front page questions, well, these were solving separation of variable questions. These are the ones that I just think that you cannot possibly get enough practice on. We're going to do 2 more of these in class together next class, and they're actually the 2021 part of an FRQ from 2021 and part of an FRQ from 2022. So they like to ask this stuff every year, and as I've been telling you guys, it's usually 5 or 6 free response points just for being able to do one of these completely. So that goes a long way towards passing the AP exam if you can guarantee those 5 or 6 points. Okay, but on the front page, 1 and 6 are the same type of question. Find the general solution. By the way, those of you moving on to Khan Academy, I would strongly suggest you do the general solution one first, because it's the same thing but less work. So you can do what you want, but I would highly suggest you do the general solution before a particular solution one. Okay, so 1 or 6 on the test review. Did anyone have issues getting the answers to those?
I did on number 4. That's not tests.
Yeah, I know. I'm just trying to group them a little bit. Sure. Okay, tell me what you did to start off question 6, so I can tell where you got stuck.
I multiplied the dx over.
Okay, now if you multiply dx right now, you have to multiply everything by dx. So you're going to have a dx here and a dx here. And that's a problem. So I'd say don't multiply by dx yet.
Yeah, I got a little bit confused.
I'd probably add this over. And somehow I got to get these separated. So since this has an x and this has an x, you could do a GCF. Multiply the dx over, and then divide both sides by y plus 5. Is that okay? But yeah, this GCF step is, I mean, not the most common, but certainly possible. Okay, and then from here, this integrates with one that we have memorized because there's no chain rule. This is integrating, just undoing power rule. Always check with derivative. Don't forget your plus c. And this one said find general solution, so we don't actually have to solve for a numerical value of c. We can just leave plus c. To get y out of this, you need to exponentiate both sides. So e to the log base e of this stuff is going to become this stuff. Again, like we talked about in the last handout, this technically, the other side could be positive or negative, but I'm going to show you why that doesn't matter on this type of question. Right here, when you add exponents, that's the same thing as multiplying things with the same base. And the reason why we always do that is because then this can just be changed to c. A number to an unknown power is just a new unknown number. And subtract 5 over. And the reason why I don't have to worry about whether this side's positive or negative to make these absolute value signs go away, like we did on the last handout, is because this is already an unknown number. So I don't know. If it needs to be a positive unknown number, then great, make it positive. If it needs to be negative, it needs to be negative. But we don't have enough information to solve for it anyway, so we don't really care if he's positive or negative. And even though the general solution questions are usually just a touch easier because you can't actually solve for C, which saves you a couple steps, it is kind of unfortunate that you don't have anything to check. If they told us this went through 0, 1, we could plug in 0, 1 to make sure that that fit our equation to know if it was wrong or not. Okay, so I kind of flew through the last part. What part are you most concerned about?
I was just confused about how the C got multiplied with the E at the very last part.
How this became this?
Yeah, why would you just like simplify that?
Well, again, E is just a number. So if you raise it to an unknown power, this is going to be a number, right? And it's still going to be a number we don't know, so we just always call it C. It's not the same C, but it's just a different unknown number. So
Okay.
instead of saying times e to the C, just saying C looks cleaner, so they're always going to do that in multiple choice. So you need to practice doing that too.
Okay.
And in fact, if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be doing this step. Like splitting this apart in this way is not the most common thing to do. But I know to do it because I know this is going to change to C and they're going to expect you to do that. So was anybody else going to ask about 6? Want to ask something specific before I take it away? Okay, then, all right, what about the particular solutions ones? 2 and 4?
Number 4.
Number 4? I've not worked these this year, but if I remember right, these were a little more difficult, I think. X, Y, 2, 1. Okay, so if you didn't need 6, that's great, but make sure that you did not need any assistance with number 4 before you tune me out and move on to the Khan Academy. Okay, so to find this particular solution, they're asking me to solve for y. So what original function would make this be true, where this is his derivative? So I did go ahead and change y prime into dy dx already. Now, again, each of these steps, each one of these questions, you need to separate the variables, you need to integrate, you always deal with c, and you always solve for y. Sometimes separating the variables can be harder, require more steps or more difficult algebra. Sometimes the integration is harder, especially if it's used substitution. Sometimes if you've got information to deal with c, to solve for c, then to me that's more work, so that makes it harder. And of course, solving for y can be just finished depending on the question versus still needing a few steps. But all that being said, for this one, it looks like the y stuff needs to go to the left, and then this is going to need to go to the right. But at some point, you need to be able to separate these. So just like question 6, eventually at some point, you need to factor out that x. You need to factor out a GCF. So to me, there's too many steps to do the separation in one step. So I multiplied the dx over, I factored out an x, I could divide both sides by x squared, and I could divide both sides by 5 minus 6y. And you want to be careful that you don't lose anything, because you don't want to spend another 5 minutes on this question and just giving yourself no shot. Now these two can cancel and make 1 over x at least. So, okay, I think we are completely separated now. Okay, we're still okay? Okay, then the whole point of separating is to make the integration work out. So on the right side, this is one that we just memorized, so that should take us about 3 seconds. On the left, unfortunately, this one looks like he's got some chain rule in there, And to be honest, I'm not 100% comfortable doing that without making a mistake. So worst case with integration is to do the U substitution. Think about what you have, what you need. I need this to be 3 dy, so multiplying by negative 1/2, so that you can rewrite the question. Now, of course, you don't have to do it that quickly, but U substitution, remember when we did that? And I told you that is probably the single most important thing we do all year. If you feel like you're getting rusty at U substitution, you need to practice that some more. Okay, now it fits a pattern that I memorize. Can plug in my U. So that slows me down a bit, but at least I didn't have to do that on the right side also. Okay, are you still with me through the integration part? Okay. Then the next thing you always have to do is deal with C. So sometimes it's just a matter of remembering to put plus C if it's a general solution question. In this one, they gave us a point that our answer needs to go through. So when x is 2, y is 1, we need to plug that in and solve for C. Actually, this is looking familiar. This might be the one we did on our notes. The absolute value one. That's fine, we can finish it. I'm just...
Yeah, no, I didn't even like the separation of variables part at the beginning.
Oh, okay.
So,
Are,
yeah.
are you okay with how I did that though?
Yeah, now I am. Now that you
Okay.
walked through it, but
Are you okay with the U substitution?
yeah.
Okay. Let's just go ahead and finish it since we're so close anyway. Plug in 1 for y, this becomes -1, absolute value makes it +1, but the natural log of +1 would be 0, 0 times -1/2 would be 0, C is negative. It's just on that other handout, I like it did the first half of the question for us, so we could just focus on the absolute value part. You do all of that so that you can plug that in, and you have now successfully dealt with C. The last thing you need to do is now solve for y. And this one, everything about this question seems to be the hard version. It was a hard separation of variables. It was hard integration because U substitution. They gave us a point, so solving for C is more work than not having to solve for C. And then solving for y also looks like it's going to take a few steps. So I multiplied everything by -2. I exponentiated. Over here, e to the log base e of this stuff just becomes this stuff. I'm going to leave the absolute value sign there for just a second to make sure I have to keep up with that. Now on this, do you guys see, because I kind of flew through this on the other handout because it's not what I really want you to focus on. This, you need to understand, comes out to be x to the -2. Do you know why that needs to be x to the -2? Okay, if you don't, it's because it's almost this property that we have to use here. A number to the log of the same, but the base of the same number of something just simplifies to be that something. This is e to the log base e of some stuff, but you can't just ignore that this -2 is here. You can't just put a number here and it still be the same property. So 99% of the time with logarithms we bring this exponent down, but in this case we actually want to move it up out of the way. Now it's e to the log base e of some stuff, and so it just simplifies to that stuff. And then exact same thing over here. E to the log base e, if I move this up, that becomes 2 squared and it just becomes 4.
Why did you just get rid of the addition?
I didn't, I changed it to multiplication. Because the way you're used to seeing it is this direction. When you multiply things with the same base, you add the exponents. This is the exponents being added, so I'm splitting it apart. I'm doing e to this. I'll write it out as an extra step. I'm doing e to this one times e to this one. So you're going this way. It's a little bit harder to see, but it does happen quite a bit on these questions. But then because of this property, all of this becomes x to the negative 2. All of this becomes 2 squared, which I'm just going to call 4. And then at some point, you want to remove these absolute value signs. And so this morning was the first time I told you how to deal with that. This stuff could equal the positive version of this, or it could equal the negative version of this. So for this to disappear, you should plug in that initial condition to 1 and see if it should be, let's rewrite this, multiply those, see if it works or if it's the opposite of what you want. So if I plug in 1 for y, this side becomes negative 1. If I plug in 2 for x, this side becomes positive 1. That's a problem. So this time, the inside of this absolute value stuff did not equal the positive version, it equals the negative version. I need to make sure those stay equal. Subtract the 5, divide both sides by negative 6. Okay, well, there we go. Question was so long it crashed the program. See how much I lost. Okay, divide both sides by negative 6. Reduce your fraction. And now you've got it down to y equals. Optional, but highly suggested, is make sure your final answer goes to this point. By the way, this is a good test taking strategy too. When you see a multiple choice question, and let's say it's one of these problems, and you get an answer or you're just not confident in your answer, you could probably eliminate some of the choices just by checking, if I plug this in, does it work? So if I plug in 2 here, I get 2/12, which is the same thing as 1/6. 1/6 plus 5/6 equals 1, and the fact that it does go through that point is a good sign for that. Doesn't guarantee it, but probably fine. Now I will also add that this version, or this question, was pretty much worst case scenario for everything. Hard separation, the hardest integration, having to deal with C, actually solve for it, and one of the tougher solving for y. Most real AP questions are just like a combination of that. They're not usually all the parts are hard. One question might be tough on separation and integration. Another question might be tough on solving for y, but you usually don't have all 4 of the steps being difficult. Okay, so for some variety here, let me look at the, oh, never mind. I'm going to be quiet because it is just about our lunch break. So find a stopping place. Alright, we need to move on. Alright, so I was moving on to the back. So you guys need to either be working on the Khan Academies or asking me questions from the review up here. So on the back, kind of had two sample FRQs, a little bit of slope field, a little bit of separation of variables, and a tiny bit of what I would call review, like just random old stuff. So what questions from the back can I help with?
B on the second FRQ.
B, FRQ2. Ava, you need to move on to your math. You can do that later. Okay, so what does that even mean? What is d squared y over dx squared asking for?
Second derivative.
Second derivative, okay. So they gave us the first derivative. Or if you don't want to write it like that, you could say y prime, and we want y double prime. So again, this is actually something from last semester. So we're taking the derivative with respect to x, and to take the derivative of something divided by something, we have to use the quotient rule. So that's where you took the derivative of the numerator, which would just be 1, times the denominator left alone, minus, and then do them in the other way. Leave the numerator alone, times the derivative of the denominator. But this is the important piece here. When you take the derivative of y squared with respect to x, you just do the power rule, but then y and x are different variables. So that was what we called implicit. If this variable doesn't match the variable you're taking the derivative of, you need one of those included. And then all over the denominator squared. So now we have the, I should write it like this. That's the first derivative, that's the second derivative. But it says in terms of x and y's. So x is fine, y prime is not fine. So instead of saying y prime, we need to put what y prime is equal to, but that's not a problem because we have that right here. Now technically it's in terms of x and y's, so if this was free response, I would just quit. I gave the answer that they asked for. It's in terms of x and y like they asked for. Of course, if this was multiple choice, then they're probably going to make this look a little bit nicer. Specifically, probably get rid of this complex fraction. If you multiply everything by y squared, then you don't have fractions within a fraction. So some of this stuff, obviously, you can guarantee will be on your chapter 6 quiz test, but something like this may be on there. But the main thing is this. Did you remember the y prime here and y? Is there?
Yeah. I think I just didn't go far enough, and then I was like, looking at the scoring sheet, and then they like wrote it in a different way, and I just
Okay. Probably just plugging this in so that it's in terms of x and y's only and not y primes. Okay, others from the back page, either of the slope fields or either of the separation particular solutions. I don't remember, but I suspect these probably came from real FRQs. I just don't know the year. They usually get grouped together like this. Okay, then this is probably one of the handouts I will ask you guys to turn in next class to give you some participation points. But even if I don't ask for it next class, I'll certainly ask for it this time next week before we start the test. Okay, so I'm going to start coming around so I can help with the Khan Academies. They are due the 4 class next Tuesday, but again, other than pausing to ask some questions, this is the only thing I'm asking y'all to do, so I really don't want this to be part of your homework. But if you're missing a lot and having to redo a lot, then I guess it is homework, but it also should be moving you towards, or can be considered part of your studying, since this is the big, hardest part of this unit.
I'm having trouble figuring out like how to, I guess, separate the variables.
On this one, I'd probably just square those two. Since it's not add or subtract, you can just square the x and square the y. And then you can factor out a y squared out of both of those. And then you can divide it over.
Okay.
And then I think it will be separated.
Okay.
There is one thing, I know I said this, but it's something I don't think y'all consider enough. And it should help you get 100% on your Khan Academy a little bit quicker. But let me pull it up so I can see an example question. By the way, Khan Academy, as you guys know, I haven't made you do any of these in a long time, but there are more quizzes in these units. So I think there's one that just has you practice separating the variables. I'm not assigning that one to you just because I can't make you do all of them. It would be too much work. But if you realize that you need some of that practice, then you can find that on their website. It doesn't have to be assigned to you. That's not the type. Sorry. I'm actually skipping through questions, so I got 0 out of 4 correct. I don't know why it's giving me that sound. I was trying to find one of the multiple choice questions. Okay, of course, when you guys miss one, you should try to learn from your mistakes. So you might click on the Get Help, and then if you can't see where your stuff went off, or you're not understanding what they're doing, and you can't learn from your mistakes, then that's where you need to ask me to look at it and help you. Somebody, like your guys, getting ready, I can. Well, that's just means y, so if you say dy over dx, it's a negative y. Then you can separate.
I know.
I hope.
Oh.
Or not.
Oh, yeah. We used to not have it much like that.
Oh, it's so nice.
Because that's not how you integrate.
I'm not lucky about
To integrate 1 over x, it would be natural log of absolute value of x. But if it's something else, you need to think of this as x to the negative 3. If you think of that as x to the negative 3, then you can undo the power rule.
I get stuck. It's kind of all over.
Where are you starting? Here's the start?
Here's the start. Yeah.
Okay. So you move the 5 over. I usually leave the constants alone, but there shouldn't be anything wrong with that. Okay, that looks fine. Derivative sign gives you cosine 1/5. This is yeah, so you've got very similar issue to what she's got here. You shouldn't need to use substitution here because you're just undoing the power rule. You need to think of this as 1/5, which you did. 1 over y squared is the same thing as y to the negative 2.
Yeah, so 3 times differently. Yeah. Okay.
Write it as y to the negative 2. And there's no need for u substitution because we can just raise the power by 1, divide by the new power, and it's integrated.
Okay.
So, negative
Oh,
1
it's
is this. Y. That's gonna be inverse sine. You probably don't compare that. What is that? Hold on, let me see. I didn't know that was. Which one is that? The second Khan Academy or the first? Well, go ahead and work it as normal, and then at the end I can tell you how to figure out which one you're answering. Arc sine just means inverse sine. Yeah, it's a different way to say that. Your left side looks fine, your right side, you never put a plus C though, so you lose a point on FRQ.
When did you say to start with this?
As soon as you say you integrated,
Oh, okay.
if you integrate only one side, you better put a plus C. If you integrate both sides, you only need to put 1 plus C.
Okay.
But if you said you integrated and there's not a C, then
it's
that
gonna
can't be
wrong.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you're close now.
Okay.
Okay, so then you square this, make this x squared, y squared. Okay. And then both of those terms on the right have a y squared. So factor out a GCF of y squared. Okay, and now you can divide that y squared over and you got it separate. This is like negative 1 over y.
So you.
Because it's like 1 over this y.
Because like number one, I would feel like I would not, so it's not or
Okay, you could do that.
But then I would have to divide it back out, right? Because you can't have more on the side.
Well, if you multiply this side by y, it cancels out over here. Multiply this side by y, you've got a y that you need. Then you're gonna have to divide all this stuff. I don't know that this is the most efficient way, but yes, what you're saying is work. What I would do is multiply everything by -1 to get rid of the negative.
I mean, I guess you could do that. But you'd
And then
still
multiply
get,
this by negative.
because then if you add them, you get negative
Minus.
y to the -1.
Well, same thing.
Just like negative
Plus c minus c. We don't know what the number is, so.
I guess it's no.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then now you've got 1 over y. So what you really want to do is do the reciprocal here. So you can flip this side of your equation to make it y equals, as long as you flip this side.
So
and make
1
it
over.
1 over all of that.
That's good. Oh, it's just.
Is that what the answers look like, or sure?
Well, yeah, except for there's one that has plus C under it, and I didn't know.
Well, but look,
under its things.
you took the reciprocal of the left side.
So
You have
it
to do
would
the
be-
reciprocal of the entire right side,
Okay.
not just the one part you want.
So I'm gonna remember at 1 over y squared.
Okay.
Would that be like natural log squared or natural log of absolute negative y squared? Or how?
If you say,
Or should I do the top and just do y the -2 times?
if you say,
Oh. Yeah.
okay, if you say this integrates like this, if I take the derivative,
Yes.
I would get 1 over y squared times chain rule 2y. These should cancel, or one of these should cancel, and you would get 2 over y. Not the
Yeah.
same thing. The only time you need to be doing natural log is if you've got one, well, I understand your confusion, but you need to rewrite this with exponent rules
Okay, but then.
and then undo power rule.
With negative y to the -1.
Yeah.
Okay. Just negative 1 over y.
Right? So then you need to multiply both sides by a negative. And then do you know how to get this to be y equals instead of 1 over y equals?
Izzy's mom is gonna start my laundry. Wait, hold on, I'm back for it.
Okay.
I don't know, well, we're going to Kansas City this weekend.
Okay, I got like,
I got an arc cosine one.
I got cosine now.
Okay. So the only, since this is not cosine times y, and you can't just divide both sides by cosine, the only way to strip that cosine off of there is to do inverse cosine on both sides. Because inverse cosine of cosine is just y.
That's the negative one.
Or arc. And then you gotta do it, well, no, when you do it to this side, when you do inverse cosine of cosine, those two cancel and just leave you a y. That's why you're doing that.
So just y.
On the left. But because you're doing inverse cosine on the left, you gotta do inverse cosine on the right. Or arc cosine.
You don't know. Yes.
The rest of it messed up.
Probably that one.
Oh, I don't know, that was the rest of the question. What's the rest of your answer?
So, second, I just like switch up their roles.
Okay, so see right here, you do the arc cosine of the whole left side. So you have to take arc cosine of the whole right side. So right here, they just did arc.
Because you have 1 over y, right?
Yeah.
Divide by
You don't really need to worry about
And you
arc.
get 1
arc of it.
y equals -5 sine x.
Okay.
Because if it's 1 over y, in order to get this out of the here, you could just
Just,
divide.
if you integrate this, if you just do this part,
What do you mean?
you just.
You're trying to
take
get
the
y
derivative,
equals.
try to go backwards.
It's not even a thing for
The derivative of natural log of something gives you 1 over the something. Well,
Oh, it'd be
because
1
chain
over
rule,
negative
if you
5
have
sin
multiply
x
by
plus
the-
c equals y.
creates a
Because
negative.
if you
Oh,
multiply
like
all of that by
reciprocal.
y, and then you
So
divide
negative
that,
negative.
then you get
If
1
you,
over.
if you actually go
negative
through all
5
the
sin x.
substitutes.
Is that an answer?
Yeah, yeah.
If you do use substitutions.
Yeah,
then
yeah,
that's
that's
good.
it.
But that's not what's happening.
So I would have to, since these are with sine, I would say x, I have to do 1 over sine.
What's this say? 9?
9.
I'm confused. Okay, so if you take the integer and the full e with
So I
x,
think I got something.
it'd be 4 e with x, right? Is that what?
Yeah.
And then if you do the e thing, you bring that up, right? What is this?
Why don't you just combine these fractions?
Wouldn't that just
They already
be
have a common
C?
denominator.
So,
Yeah.
Make it like
9x.
yeah, you have to multiply over something.
x minus 9 over 7.
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
And then you can just multiply
Yeah.
the sine y over, and
I just forgot about it.
you have all your y's on the left. Did you see what you needed?
Yeah, I got it. The one I wanted.
Yeah, this is all I was worried about, knowing that you can take the reciprocal of that side, as long as you take the reciprocal of that
Yeah.
side.
Still like 11 minutes, so if y'all are seeing a common question you can't figure out, you need to let me try to help push you in the right way. Obviously, y'all are welcome to stop in during the drive room as well to work on it. And you can get some help out needed, but.
Well, you can move this to the denominator and make it e to the positive y. Make that look like a fraction.
Oh, like 1 over e to the
Well, 2x over e to the y.
Mm.
And then you can multiply e to the y over and have the y's on the left. This, okay, well, this doesn't integrate like this.
Oh, something weird
If I took, if I just look at what you have here, if I take the derivative of this,
But it's back now.
it would give 1 over y squared, what you want. But then because of chain rule, it would also multiply 2y, you don't have
Or did you get negative cosine?
That's what it is.
Well, I took the
You need to think of this as y to the negative
What did
2
you
plus
get?
x squared,
Okay.
and then undo power.
And then plus 9x plus
What's x?
negative cosine.
Okay.
You know, multiply by negative one. Oh, no, I did do it right, and then this is just, I was confused by something, because this is how many times by
Or what kind of, are you making the same mistakes each time, or?
It's just where you go. Oh, okay. Okay, well, I know. Then you can plug this side by y. So just do whatever you have. Let's see. So that's it. So was that complete and happy? Yes.
Wait, so if I do this,
Still good lesson to learn.
I need help for the side and that side. I have to separate it so it looks like
If you're
this,
proud,
right?
you can't do it. You need to. Like, it's just wrong.
Oh my gosh, I'm so then I take.
So right here, you raise this step to e, so that becomes y, raise this step to e, but you still have
Yeah.
the way you're split,
So
you
take
should
that
split
away,
this
I'm
up,
just
so you
not
go into
Ellen.
this, but it looks like you wrote that down.
It's okay.
But then you also have a times
Yeah,
e
you
to
want
the
that.
c.
Oh, so we go like
So
that,
you
or
multiply
this?
things with the same base, the base being e here, you add six.
Okay, we're not
So
showing
put
both
a
sides.
times e to the c
CY
on your next
equals
step,
1 over x squared plus c. So I guess it would be
to the
this.
c, c is in the exponent.
I don't know, you're doing 20 steps in 2 minutes.
And then
No, okay,
since this
so you
is a
take
number
each one
times
of
the
those
known power, we're
sides.
just gonna call all of
So
this
that
c
would
and put it
cancel
in
out,
front.
that would be
So that's probably why
one.
we're doing that. I don't know about reciprocity.
So it'd give
They're
you
always
one.
gonna do that.
So that's good. You're doing
Okay.
x squared plus c.
This, but then for ty,
Why?
take the, because it, it's just integrated with
It's
20y.
still-
But then, I didn't know what to do with this side, 'cause I thought that you did the
This.
ln thing with that, but I guess not.
Well, you can, but go ahead and write down what you're leaning towards.
Same side.
Yes, wait,
Sorry.
no, it's okay. I mean, that makes sense. If it doesn't
Now,
really
if we check it
matter.
with derivative, if I take the derivative of
I
this,
think I just got really
you
good.
would get a 1 over 6x minus
I'm so sure when you that's not fair.
42. But then because of chain rule, you can also get a times 6. That's not here. You don't want a times 6. So you can multiply by 1/6 to balance that out.
Using them so much to the new wire.
Or you can just do u substitution. You can make this thing your u. When you solve for du, you would create that 1/6 and you don't have to do it. But at least it's already y equals, so that's why it's easy.
might want to finish up what you're on, find a stopping place. Got about 5 minutes till you're dismissed here. So again, I'm not going to look up your Khan Academy scores and give you a homework grade on that until next Tuesday. But obviously, if you don't just take care of it, you may forget about it. So I really think all these little mistakes that you might be making or things you're not thinking about will help you quite a bit. So please do that. Make sure you bring your binder with you to next class so I can try to get in a couple other grades of stuff that you should have done. Consider looking over those things I have listed in number 6 on the agenda as far as studying. And remember, we will have first lunch on Tuesday because we will be in phase 2 in Mr. Williams' room. We cannot be in here. They will be using this room for testing. So.